Previously, in the Aeneid, we learned that Juno hates the Trojans, and why, too. Now we're going to see what happens because of that. We've already seen Juno being identified with rage, and Aeneas is our man of piety. These are two of the dominant themes in the Aeneid, and they are often opposed to each other, just like Juno and Aeneas. The storm that Juno raises in her anger against pious Aeneas seems to epitomize rage completely. Juno's speech in lines 37 through 49 has some difficult Latin, so pay attention. I'll try to do my best to elucidate it for you, but before we get to that, we have a brief description of what's going on. We jump, as Horace says, in medias res, right into the middle of things. Don't worry, we get a flashback at the end of the Trojan War and years of wandering in books 2 and 3. Right now, we are just north of Sicily. The laiti in line 35 refers to the Trojans. It's a nominative plural adjective, and we can get by with translating it as such, they, happy, were giving. But often Latin uses nominative adjectives where English does adverbs. So, they were happily giving also works. Ultum, by the way, means the deep sea. We saw this already in line 3. In plus the accusative means into, remember, and the rest of line 35 is rather neat. So they were churning the foam of the sea with their bronze-beaked ships. Both salis, salt, and aera, bronze, show metonymy, where the salt actually represents the sea, salt is part of the sea, and aera represents the bronze prow of the ships. This is also a poetic translation of rueebant, which normally means to rush. You won't find this word used like this in Cicero. The cum clause that fills up line 36 and the first part of 37 actually lacks a verb. From context, we could imagine it's something like loquitur or dicit, speaks or says. Secum, which you would think would mean literally with her, is better translated to herself. And keep this in mind, it comes back in line 50. A few more quick notes. Aeternum is neuter accusative, and it modifies the neuter accusative vulnus at the end of the line. And haec is also neuter accusative, the object of our imaginary loquitur, but plural. It's as if it's modifying an imaginary verba, words, but you can also just translate it as these things, referring to her speech that follows. You know, Latin didn't have punctuation marks, so Virgil is going to have to provide us with the information with his words that is normally, for us, supplied by punctuation. So you'll often see something like said these things right before a quote, and something like having said these things right after a quote, telling us that the speech is over. It's part of epic style, especially ancient epic, before the invention of punctuation. Okay, so now the hard part. Juno's speech is filled with anger and vitriol. There are a lot of elisions here, which I can only imagine emphasizes her rage. Her words slur together because she is so mad. We begin with something like an accusative of exclamation and indirect statement. The me is going to be the subject of the infinitives desistere and posse. We can imagine that this clause would follow after something like, who could believe that? Or, is it really the case that? So me, the ne enclitic makes this a pretty obvious rhetorical question, is the subject of desistere. Victam, feminine accusative singular, modifies the me. Juno is female, you know. And incepto is an ablative of separation, from my undertaking. And the elision between me ne and incepto, pronounced something like me nincepto, might be a reference to the first word of the Iliad, menin, rage, which makes sense because Juno is our agent of rage, especially against Aeneas. And there's the same construction in the next line. Assume the me from line 37 is the subject of posse, with italia as another ablative of separation. Avertere, to avert or turn away from, carries with it a sense of separation that the ablative italia takes up. Finally, the king of the Teucrians is Aeneas. Teucer was one of the ancestors of the Trojans, but originally from Crete. Quippe, in line 39, shows that this sentence is pretty sarcastic. Juno scoffs at the idea that the fates can restrict her. I'm not suggesting that Juno thinks that she can change the fates, but she knows that she can delay or even possibly influence how the fates result. So in classical mythology, the fates wouldn't map the future out exactly, but they would identify main results, the path to which can be altered. So think about the myth of Oedipus. He was fated to kill his father. So instead of being raised by his natural parents, Laius, his father, tried to have his son killed when he was just an infant. This altered the path. Oedipus was raised in Corinth rather than Thebes when he was rescued, but when he heard an oracle that said he would kill his own father, he avoided Corinth, thinking his adopted parents were his real parents. But this drove him towards Thebes and his real father. So Juno knows what the fates say, but she can definitely make Aeneas' life miserable. Fatis is an ablative of agent, after the passive verb vetor. Pallas in 39, the nay, by the way, makes this an obvious rhetorical question, refers to Minerva, Jupiter's favorite daughter. Pallas is a common epithet for the Greek goddess Athena, who is associated with Minerva, and Pallas either derives from the Greek word for maiden, pallax, or for the word to brandish, pallo, as in a spear brandisher. The main verb here is potuit, which takes the complementary infinitive exuere, to burn up, and submergere, to drown. The Argives are the Greeks, an ending for the genitive plural, aurum, we've seen this before, and this word qualifies classem. Whose fleet? The fleet of the Argives. And the ipsos are the men themselves. The Argives are Greeks rather than the fleet. Ponto is an ablative of location. In line 41 gives us Minerva's reason for doing this. Aeneas modifies Ajax oilei, and noxam and furias, the crime and furies, are the object of the preposition ob. So during the sack of Troy, Ajax, son of Oileus, and don't confuse him with the other Ajax, the great warrior from the Iliad, who ended up killing himself after he lost the contest for Achilles' armor. That one is commonly known as Telamonian Ajax. He's the son of Telamon, and sometimes referred to as Greater Ajax. So this Ajax here is Lesser Ajax, or as I like to call him, Lil Ajax. So during the sack of Troy, this Lil Ajax dragged Cassandra, the daughter of Priam, the never-believed prophetess, out of the temple of Minerva and brutally raped her. This the goddess did not forget, necessitating this punishment. I like here how the emphasis is on the unius. Minerva was able to destroy a fleet and kill so many people, all because of one man's action. But Juno can't do the same for the future actions of a whole nation of people. That's unfair, at least according to Juno. Ipsa, in 42, is Minerva herself, with yakulata, a perfect participle from a deponent verb, having hurled or hurling. The fire of Jupiter is the lightning bolt, and Minerva was granted the right to use his thunderbolt. Line 43 is relatively straightforward, with two perfect tense verbs followed by their accusative direct objects. Ventis is an ablative of means. So Minerva apparently was able to create the storm herself. Such great power. We change emphasis and shift our perspective to Ajax with illum in line 44 as the direct object of the two verbs in 45. Corripuit and infixit, referring to Ajax, but if we are reading this as we should in Latin and in order, we can easily understand this line by translating illum as him. Transfixo pectore is an ablative of separation, identifiable because of the x, from on the participle experantem. The flames that Ajax breathes out are possibly related to the lightning, rather than Ajax himself turning into a dragon. Line 45 has our main verbs, the ones that govern the illum, and tell us what Minerva does to Ajax. Turbine is an ablative of means, either with or in a whirlwind, and scopulo acuto is an ablative of location, on a sharp rock. Now Juno complains. Ostego, and the diaeresis, this very abrupt pause in the line, puts a lot of weight behind the ostego. And contrast this with the ipsa in line 42. Ost, by the way, is an archaic form of ot. The gods speak in archaisms. Divum is another syncopated second declension genitive plural, queen of the gods. Incedo is first person singular because I is the subject, even if it's relayed to us through the quai. And incedo means stride or advance. It's how soldiers march, but in Virgil, it's how gods walk. And when he uses this verb, there's a sense of divine nature about the walk. Juno does remind us who she is with et soror et conjunx, and the fact that she's related in two different ways to Jupiter. Iovis is the genitive form of Jupiter, so for more on this, check out this video. So the fact that she's related in two different ways to Jupiter should give her extra privileges over Minerva. And una cum gente tot annos refers to the 10-year length of the Trojan War. Annos is an accusative of duration of time, the one race contrasting with Minerva's issue about one man in line 41. The rest of Juno's speech is a rhetorical question, with a shout of indignation, with present subjunctives adoret and imponet. And who, that's the quisquam, would worship. We've seen the word noumen before, the divinity, not to be confused with nomen, the name. Praeterea usually means besides, but here it's more like after this. And translate supplex as a suppliant. A suppliant is someone who would humbly present an offering to Juno or any other god, seeking a divine response. Juno claims that her divinity would be diminished if she were rendered powerless in her efforts to divert the Trojans from Italy. So in this section, we see Juno convincing herself, giving reasons why she should be able to stop them from reaching Italy. The section and the rest of the storm that follows is modeled on the storm in Homer's Odyssey, but there are careful distinctions that are very important in our understanding of each work. Aeneas is not Odysseus. He's a much more selfless leader, concerned less with personal glory than with the completion of his mission. So even though Virgil takes Homer's framework for his action, he carefully adds differences that we need to pay attention to, because this is where his meaning lies. Next up, Juno needs to find a way to create the storm, so she goes to Aeolus, king of the winds.